So it's been a very bleak and black-pilling few weeks for those of us who support Brexit, or at the very least, democratic process. The British Parliament, elements within the government, and activists from without have been doing their very best to make sure that Brexit is not carried out and the will of 17 million people be ignored in favour of the status quo. And within all of these events have been some of the most blatant and even hilarious moments of projection from the Remainer camp. So, in an effort to raise some spirits and to highlight hypocrisy, I bring you this list video of the 5 most blatant acts of projection from Remainers. Number 1. Brexiteers want to sell off the NHS. We've all heard the story that broke a few months back in regards to the NHS, or our NHS, as the Remainers and the left like to call it. The story was of Donald Trump and the British government allegedly negotiating with each other to sell off parts of the NHS to America. This created an uproar and an example of what would happen if this government continues to be in power. The privatisation of the NHS only continue, and this will make it harder for the poorest elements of our society to get quality healthcare, despite the fact that the NHS has been finding it rather difficult to actually provide us decent healthcare, let alone quality healthcare. But that is beyond the scope of this video, and to be honest, it's not all their fault. But what if I told you that of all the organisations that could have exposed this, Greenpeace found out that the EU have also been negotiating with the US as part of the TTIP, or Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, would result also in the privatisation or even dismantling of the NHS and other European healthcare systems. And this was back in 2016, just when the vote was had. Yet apparently this has been thrown down the memory hole by Remain. It does not exist. The EU would never do such a thing and negotiate with a foreign power to dismantle independent countries' own healthcare systems. When the EU does it, it is ignored. But when the British government does it, allegedly, it is outrageous. It just proves that really, it's not about the principle, it's about what side they are on. Number 2. Brexiteers are racist. This could easily be higher up the list if this list was actually in order of most blatant. It isn't. It's just a list of 5. But one cannot get more blatant acts of projection than the accusations of racism from the Remain crowd. Firstly, and let's get this out of the way, yes, Brexiteers can be racist. There, I said it. However, it seems from my perspective that the Remainers seem to be far and away more racist than the Brexiteers in some cases. For example, the very posh woman who went viral on Question Time. Yeah, her.
I think it's appalling that people could even consider making people who live in this country, who have made it their home, to send them back. As you said, we have parents. What about the teachers we have? If we're going to have teachers who are going to teach French and Spanish to our kids, I'd rather they were French and Spanish people and Italian people than English people.
But Liz Truss says they're going to be allowed to stay.
They are, but
you don't believe her?
You don't know that. You don't know that. And I think it's who would we get to work, if for anybody else here who works in London, who would be serving our coffee in Pret? Who would be selling us our sandwiches in Pret? Yeah. You're not going to get English people
as I
to take
understand
those jobs.
That's pretty racist. Not only does she view EU migrants from places like Poland, Hungary, Spain, Italy, etc. as just wage slaves to do her labour and serve her coffee, as if they aren't really human beings, just servants, that this is all they should be brought in for, she has a downright contempt for the average Brit. Now, the average Brit will mostly be white, of course, but that doesn't mean she doesn't dislike the average coloured Brit amongst us who aren't getting with the programme. But essentially, we Brits are just either not good enough or just too lazy to make her coffee at Pret. Never mind that in any town or place that has not received much, if any, immigration that has a Pret will have British workers serving there. Here's a moot point, apparently. They don't exist. Who will serve us our coffee? Who will pick the cotton? The foreign wage slaves or the lazy gammons and baked gammons? Speaking of these two terms, again, which side is using these terms unironically? Not the Brexit side, but Remain. Gammon was possibly one of the most insidious terms to have come into popular usage during this time, popularised by the more leftist Remainer types, like, ironically enough, Owen Jones, who claimed that unlike the word chav, which is what his first book is about, it's a defence of the white working class. Yeah, how things change, right guys? This word is totally not racist, guys. Never mind the fact the term obviously refers to the skin pigmentation of a white British person, whilst chav does not, even though it is used mainly to refer to a white person, it does not have to necessarily, and its POC variety refers to a baked or burned gammon. Yeah, a baked gammon is an Uncle Tom in case you didn't know, guys. It's apparently not racist. I'm sure there's plenty more examples of racism. For example, claiming it's poor white people that are racist, that they have this massive problem, when the largely middle and upper class Remain can be just as, if not more racist, just in a different mode of expression. But hey, you know what? I've said enough on this. Let's move on. Number 3. Brexiteers are undemocratic. This particular case of projection could not be more blatant if it tried to be. Essentially, the Remainers are complaining that us Brexiteers are undemocratic for several reasons. 1. We refuse to allow a second referendum on the Brexit result. This isn't undemocratic. Firstly, we are not a direct democracy. When a constitutional monarchy that is representational democracy has a referendum, there has to be a period of time after the vote is made before we decide to have another. Brexit has not happened yet. Therefore, we cannot just have another referendum just because you lost. And we all know that if Remain won, the Brexit side would not complain and clamour for another referendum. We would bide our time and wait for another vote 30 years down the line. Oh, and speaking of Brexit not happening yet, about that, if it were not for the Remain cabal in Parliament, we would have left months ago on the agreed date. But we didn't, and now we are spending £1 billion a month to stay in an organisation we were meant to leave. That's not Brexiteers' fault. That's Remainer MPs in Parliament and the support they receive from those Remain supporters who have been consistently screeching, whinging and protesting since 2016. How is it democratic to do everything in your power to give the United Kingdom, your own country, a worse chance at getting this deal you are all apparently desperate for? And how is it democratic to prevent one course of achieving Brexit, no deal? Moreover, your favourite politicians refuse to grant us a general election. The most democratic way of dealing with this situation, this gridlock we're in. No, instead, your MPs in the Tory party, who by the way have had petitions to remove them from their positions as MPs by their own constituents, leave the party to create a minority government that Parliament can bully and beat in votes. Yes, very democratic. Brexiteers are totally undemocratic, wanting to go with the will of the British people and going through proper legal channels to make this happen. Next. Number 4. Brexiteers are trying to stage a coup. This is perhaps similar, if not the same as the last one, and perhaps only really applies to the Tory party as opposed to the whole of the pro-Brexit side. But it's on here because it was again a blatant case of projection. But first, an explanation. When Theresa May resigned and a new leader was to be chosen, Boris Johnson won. Obviously, this created an uproar. Johnson is not legitimate because he was not elected by the people. Johnson represents a libertarian coup or force in the Tory party. I know, it's doomsday time, people. These are things that Remain, and particularly the left-wing elements of Remain, were saying. Never mind the fact that the British people vote not for an individual, but for a party, and that this coalition government simply replacing one cog needed to run the country, and that Labour had already done this before with Gordon Brown. Yeah, projection, thy name is also hypocrisy. But the prorogation itself caused consternation. This was somehow evidence that Johnson was angling to take over the country with his cabal of evil libertarians like Amber Rudd. Our glorious constitution was in danger. That's why McDonnell and Corbyn were threatening to go straight to the Queen to prevent the prorogation and this government. This is why a sizable force of MPs signed an agreement to form an alternative cabinet that's completely illegal, although they have no power whatsoever, would attempt to meet every day to run the country. But apparently it's Boris Johnson trying to set up parallel powers and stage coups. Oh, and call for insurrection in the streets, for the people to rise up to prevent a democratic will of the people. Beggars belief, guys. And finally, number 5. Remainers are stupid. We're smarter. This is perhaps pushing it, I must admit, and it is something a bit more subjective, because how do we discern what is and what is not stupid? Well, considering all that I have just shown and the outright ignorance that is on display when it comes to how our unwritten constitution works, how our parliament works, how our society works, etc. I think it's just cheap for Remainers to claim that they are smarter than Brexiteers. Oh sure, you guys on average have more qualifications than Brexiteers, being mostly middle class, but qualifications do not mean you are necessarily smarter than another person. And this is the same movement that has such exalted persons in its ranks, like Femi and EU Supergirl. One is a nice but rather dumb person who has lost every argument he has ever been in. The other cannot write a decent song to save her life and has no idea what a decent hook or vocal line is. And the less I say about literal communist Ash Sakar, the better. Yeah, there's dumb Brexiteers. The movement is not as qualified as the Remainers, but you are no smarter than us. In fact, this whole time in the past 3 years have shown that possibly You are the unintelligent ones. Do intelligent people forget what democracy is? Do intelligent people lose all control of their emotions over losing this one issue? I have so many questions related to these, but I believe I rest my case. So there we are, guys. Some blatant acts of projection by the Remain side. I encourage you all to give me your examples. I'm sure the usual suspects who watch and froth at the mouth at my Brexit content will be here to give us their counter-examples. Please, do go ahead. I encourage you. Just remember, it applies to you too, because it's projection. This was mostly a fun video, but I think it's important that stuff like this is pointed out and that we keep calling it out and airing it as much as possible. We cannot have more things like the NHS issue be memory hold. Until next time, I'll see you later.